This is Maggie from the Active Transportation Alliance, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So this webinar series is a partnership between the Active Transportation Alliance and the Illinois Public Health Institute with a lot of guidance and support from IDOT. So today we'll be providing an overview of IDOT's Safe Routes to School funding opportunity. So again, this is the first of a two-part webinar series, and it's the purpose is to help applicants across the state of Illinois develop successful applications. So we'll be recording this webinar today, so you can refer to it later or send it to others you know, and everyone should already be muted. And if you do have questions during this webinar, use the chat box and we will address any questions at the end of the webinar. So let me introduce our team at Active Trans. So we've got Melody Geraci, she's our Deputy Executive Director, Heather Shady, our Senior Transportation Planner, Crispina Ojeda Simmons, our Planning Project Manager, and myself, Maggie Shawinski, our Advocacy Manager. And those of you who aren't familiar with Active Transportation Alliance, we're a nonprofit, and our mission is to advocate for walking, biking, and public transit to create healthy, sustainable, equitable communities. And then also on the line today, we've got from the Illinois Department of Transportation, John Paris, Missy Dateman, and Alex Haflinger, who will be helping address any questions that might come up. So I'm going to turn it over to Melody to give you a little bit of background on how this initiative came together.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Melody Geraci with Active Transportation Alliance. Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to share with you a little bit of information about the Safe Routes to School program that's going to be opening up soon for proposals. But a little bit of background first about why we're doing this today, why a public health organization and an advocacy organization are leading this webinar. It's all part of a project called ISPAN, the Illinois State Physical Activity and Nutrition Program. This is a 5-year initiative that's funded by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And a number of states around the country have received this funding. And the focus is to improve the nutrition and physical activity status of people in these states, particularly in low-income and rural areas, and around these 4 focus areas using, increasing breastfeeding, improving early childhood education of physical activity and nutrition, improving the built environment, which is the part that we're working on today, and improving food service guidelines. Active Transportation Alliance is the built environment technical assistance provider, so that's how we are involved, and the Illinois Public Health Institute is leading the entire initiative for the state. Next slide. So narrowing it down to the built environment component of the project, the goals are simple. The CDC really wants to see communities across the country connected better to destinations, important destinations, everyday destinations like shopping and school and healthcare and work, connected by activity-friendly routes, meaning types of ways to get places that involve physically active transportation. And the way we're doing that is working with local communities in specific regions to improve walkability and bikeability and transit access. And the partnership with the Illinois Public Health Institute is the way that we're going about that. And for those of you who were around earlier this year and participated in our similar webinar series that focused on the Illinois Transportation Enhancements Funding Program, this is a very similar initiative. So we're doing 2 webinars this time to explore the Safe Routes to School funding program, help people get oriented, learn how to apply for it so that we can increase the number of quality applications that are getting into IDOT, and hopefully get more money into the hands of communities to improve the walk and the bike experience for kids going to school. Next slide. So this is the first iteration of the webinar series. The second one will be in September. That date is going to be communicated shortly. Today we're going to go over, kind of the nuts and bolts of how to apply for Safe Routes to School funds and what makes a compelling application. And then the second one is really going to be to answer Q&A. It's going to be an open question and answer period with ourselves and IDOT representatives so that we can really answer as many questions as humanly possible before the applications are due. So our agenda today is going to be to, again, kind of orient you to Safe Routes to School because it's a little bit of a different animal than other transportation funding programs. We'll talk about the eligibility of, who is eligible, what kinds of projects are eligible, the way that proposals are scored. We'll walk you through the application itself and then provide a few tips and tricks for getting yourself prepared. So let's talk about Safe Routes to School. Quick overview is that it is a funding program that's administered and managed by IDOT. It has been around for a while. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's a federal funding source. It's sourced as federal funding. So it's coming from the U.S. Department of Transportation ultimately. And it is part of what's called the Transportation Alternatives Program, TAP for short. And the TAP program is, again, transportation alternatives. It's a pot of money that houses both Safe Routes to School, the enhancements program, recreational trails, things like that. So non-highways, non-roadway for cars types of monies. The funding cycle happens every 2 years. It alternates with the enhancements program. So as everybody knows, last year there was a call for projects for enhancements. They were the awards were made earlier this spring, and now Safe Routes will then be, applications are due this fall, and awards will be made next year as well. It's $12 million this time for this cycle, which is more than it usually is because there was a missed year of funding that did not actually happen for a variety of reasons outside of IDOT's control. So we have a bigger pot of money this time. The background of Safe Routes to School, there's an entire universe of Safe Routes to School, of the Safe Routes to School movement that is behind the fact that we still have a funding program in this country for it. It really started as an outcry in Western Europe in the 1970s because a lot of kids were finding that children were being struck and killed or struck and injured by vehicles at a really alarming rate. And so there's kind of a groundswell movement among parents and advocates to do something about that. So they put together sort of this multifaceted package of tactics and strategies to try and increase the amount of walking and biking while decreasing the amount of injuries and deaths and, kind of having this ideal world where kids were getting the physical activity and the socialization and other benefits that they needed from the walk and bike to school, but were able to do that safely. So as the program caught fire and kind of got more popular, it made its way to the US, and in 2005, it was actually included in the federal transportation bill as a set-aside funding program. So as opposed to what it is now, which is included in as an option, it's not required for states to run Safe Routes programs. So we're lucky here in Illinois that IDOT is still funding a Safe Routes program. But back in 2005, it was required. So there was a separate pot of money just for Safe Routes to School to all 50 states. That ended in roughly 2012. So it's now just an option. It's based around this concept framework called the 6 E's, which essentially means that you can engineer and build better roadways or better ways for kids to walk and bike to school and provide them the proper kinds of facilities. But you also need to educate them about safe walking and biking. You also need to encourage them to walk or bike. You also need to, try and fairly evaluate the way that this is all working so that you can do a better job. So it's a more holistic kind of approach than just throwing money at the problem. There is, as I mentioned, a whole universe of information out there. If you want to know more about it, there are two really good, reliable sources: Safe Routes National Partnership and the National Center for Safe Routes to School. And if you're interested in, just by the way, in the links that we're going to be talking about, Crispina, our colleague, will be dropping those links into the chat. So you should be able to access those later. So the Safe Routes cycle for 2021. Oh, Maggie, I think you're taking over for me now.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. Thanks, Mel. So a little bit more details about the cycle this year, the grant program this year. So it is for infrastructure projects this year, and it is a reimbursable program. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but that means that a 20% local match is required from the project sponsor, the applicant. And there are three main goals of the program. One is to encourage children to walk or bike to school, including those with disabilities, and to making walking and biking safer, making it more appealing, and then therefore encouraging a healthier, more active lifestyle, starting from an early age. And then three, it is the purpose is to plan, develop, and implement projects that improve safety, reduce fuel consumption, reduce air pollution for students who are walking or biking to school. And the project should be within 2 miles of a elementary or middle school. And so a few examples of some past Safe Routes to School projects. These are some examples from 2019 when the most recent awards were given out. And you can see a variety of project types here, from new sidewalks to curbs to signs to flashing beacons. And this photo here is from the city of Kankakee. The King Middle School received $200,000 in Safe Routes to School funding in 2019, and it was thanks to a fourth grader at the time who's in the middle of that photo. And he sent a letter to their mayor, who's on the right there, asking for help to improve the crossing in front of their school, which is at a busy state route, Route 17. And the city, the school were interested, and they ended up applying for the grant. And now construction has just begun, and their project is going to feature widened side crosswalks, a median, improved signals, and other improvements. So it's kind of a neat story. Before we dive in now, just wanted to, for those of you who aren't familiar with these acronyms, there are a lot of acronyms that come up. So SRTS, that would be Safe Routes to School, this program. IDOT, that is the Illinois Department of Transportation. BDE, if that comes up, that is IDOT's Bureau of Design and Environment, and they have a manual that provides standard design practices for roadway design. MPO, that is a metropolitan planning organization, so it's an agency responsible for regional transportation planning, transportation spending, policy leadership. RPC, similar, Regional Planning Council, and the Council of Governments, a COG. So those are regional governing bodies that represent member local governments. TIP, that is your Transportation Improvement Program. So this would be a list of upcoming transportation projects developed by the MPO or the RPC. And PE, preliminary engineering, which needs to happen before construction of a project. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, what's required of any type of sidewalk project, and ROW, right-of-way. So those are acronyms you might hear that hopefully a lot of you are already familiar with, but if not, that is what we're referring to. So now jumping into eligibility. So who can apply? For when just thinking about schools, elementary or middle schools are eligible to receive this funding, so K through 8. And the schools can be public or private schools. For the who can apply, the application sponsor, it should be either a local government with roadway jurisdiction, so that could be municipalities, counties, townships, or it could be a school or school district. Both local governments and schools will need to be involved and work together throughout the application process, but for the sponsor, typically local governments are with the roadway jurisdiction are the application sponsor. In 2019, there were 28 infrastructure projects awarded, and the local government, just as an example, was the sponsor for 25 of those. And for 3 of those projects, it was a school or school district. Oh, and one note, so a reason why most often it's the local government is the sponsor, it's because the sponsor is responsible for administering the project, and they act as the fiscal agent. So a few key requirements. So again, the project needs to be within 2 miles of a K through 8 school, so an elementary or middle school. 1 application is allowed per school district. The minimum award is $25,000, while the maximum award, so it can be up to $250,000. And as we mentioned, it's a reimbursable grant program, so that means that the project sponsor has to pay relevant costs up front and work with IDOT to be reimbursed. So the grant follows IDOT's standard procurement process. So if it's a local letting, that means that the sponsor has to upfront the construction costs and get reimbursed by IDOT. And then if it's a state letting, then IDOT will upfront those construction costs. And you'll need to work with your local IDOT district to determine what's possible for your project. But in either case, the sponsor is responsible for collecting and providing the local match, which is that 20% of the total project cost. So last year is your project should be included in your MPO's Transportation Improvement Program, so it's TIP, if your project ends up being awarded funds. So to do this, when you're applying, you should call up your MPO or your Regional Planning Commission, your Council of Government, so if you have one, and you should make sure that they're aware that you're applying for Safe Routes to School, and that ask that if your project is awarded funding, it is included in the TIP. And then also, when you're in touch with them, you should ask them to write your project, your application, a letter of support. So some other key requirements, what is and isn't covered. So eligible phases of a project, it should be construction engineering or construction costs. What's not eligible is preliminary engineering and right-of-way costs for this particular grant. So right-of-way and easement acquisition, that should be completed before the application deadline of September 30th, and that should be documented in your application. For preliminary engineering, that there's a little more time with this. That should be completed within 6 months of the award announcement. And then a few other things. Your project needs to comply with all state and federal requirements like ADA. Funds must be obligated within 18 months of the announcement of your award. And construction needs to be completed within 3 years of your award announcement. Because there are limited funds in this program, IDOT won't allow any scoping or funding changes. So you want to make sure you have that right in your application. And then also, if there are any unused funds, those have to be returned to the program, so they can't be used for any additional work or for or applied to another program or project. All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Heather to dig into all of the types of eligible projects.
Thanks, Maggie. So there are many different types of projects eligible for Safe Routes to School funding. And as Maggie and Melody mentioned, this year they're all focused on infrastructure. So I'll talk through there's many categories, so I'll talk through those categories and what's included within them. And you should know that there's some overlap between the categories, and you can also combine categories if you have a project that's considered part of a network. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So the first category is sidewalk improvements. Sidewalks are arguably the most critical component of a safe route to school because they provide a direct, accessible, and separated pathway for students to get to and from school. So within the sidewalk improvement category, you can do everything from install a new sidewalk to repair an existing, to widen an existing. You can also install curb ramps and so on. So if there are sidewalks within your school routes that need improvements, that's one thing to consider. The next category is traffic calming or speed reduction. So these types of tools can help you reduce vehicle speeds by either narrowing the road through vertical or horizontal elements or striping. And they'll often provide an opportunity to create more comfortable crossings for pedestrians and bicyclists. So some of the eligible projects within this category include speed bumps, raised crosswalks, pedestrian medians, refuge islands, or narrowed traffic lanes that can be achieved through striping. The next category is traffic control devices and beacons. So in this category, you can make improvements to existing signals, upgrade them or replace them. Different elements that fall under this category include traffic signals that could be new or upgraded, new pavement markings such as crossings or changes to stop bars that need to be done for a signal. In roadway crossing lights, rectangular rapid flashing beacons, bike signal actuation devices, pedestrian activated signal upgrades, audible signals for people with visual impairments, countdown signals for pedestrians, and permanently mounted solar speed feedback signs. So again, these projects will certainly, like all others, need to comply with state and local standards and federal standards, but again, it can be eligible for funding. The next category is bicycle and pedestrian crossing improvements. These again can help slow down traffic at a crosswalk, increase the visibility of pedestrians and cyclists to drivers, and also make drivers more visible to pedestrians and cyclists as they cross. Some of the eligible infrastructure improvements within this category include refuge islands, raised crosswalks, and different site distance improvements. For example, if you have poles or other things that are blocking the view of pedestrians trying to cross the street, you might be able to move those. The next category includes on-street bicycle facilities. Again, there's many options available to you for these. Things like new or upgraded bike lanes, widened shoulders, different geometric improvements. For example, if you have a bike lane that's on the right side of a right turn lane and you'd like to move it to the left side to provide a little more comfort and visibility, you can do that. Adding turning lanes, creating channelization, realigning a roadway to accommodate bike infrastructure, installing different traffic signs, and also installing just general pavement markings for bikeways. Again, for these, you'll want to look to IDOT's Design Environment Manual, the BDE that Maggie mentioned earlier, to get an understanding of where these types of facilities are appropriate to go, and what kind of metrics you need to consider to install them. The final list of eligible projects includes different off-street facilities like bike paths or side paths, and secure bike parking facilities such as bike racks, covered bike shelters, or other things, or lighting to illuminate the bike parking area. So again, I mentioned earlier that you can combine multiple projects or multiple categories within one project. So you might want to think about things like, if you're installing a sidewalk, can you also install curb ramps and improve the crossings that connect to it? Or if you're installing an off-street bikeway or an on-street bikeway, are there ways to make the intersections safer along that route for especially younger cyclists who need a little more protection and accommodation? So finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about some ineligible projects that IDOT calls out in the application. So there's 3 categories in specific. The first is reorganizing pickup and drop-off procedures. We know that parents and school staff often count this as probably their biggest headache during the day, but it is an ineligible activity for safe routes to school. The goal, again, is to make the routes kids use to walk and bike to school safer, and not focus so much on dealing with the car line. The next category is school bus safety and bus stop improvements. Again, because the goal of this grant is to improve walking and biking conditions, the focus is really on making that transportation trip from a student's home to their school destination. And then the final ineligible project is a portable speed feedback trailer. So the ones that you can move around town are not eligible for Safe Routes to School funding, but if you are looking for an opportunity to install a speed feedback device on a specific road near a school or along a school route, you can install one that's permanent and mounted on a signpost. So now I will turn it over to Christina, I believe, or is it still me, Maggie? Sorry. I'm sorry, it is still me. So just in general for proposal scoring, there's several categories that will be reviewed by IDOT staff independently to score your application. And so the categories are here on the screen and then on the next screen, which we'll show in a minute, but they include, there we go. And to give a better sense of how projects will be scored, IDOT equally weights each of the categories you see, both on the screen and the previous one. They will be evaluated, especially by district engineers, especially the cost estimates, to make sure they're accurate and achievable for the project you're proposing. Also, IDOT considers the number of low-income and disabled students impacted as a scoring category and will be something that gives you higher weight. So if you have schools in your community with more low-income students or a higher percentage of disabled students, your application could potentially score higher if it's benefiting those students in those communities. And just to note, IDOT will be gathering these data from the Illinois School Board of Education. So those numbers will be calculated by IDOT, not by the applicant. And now I will hand it over to Christina to talk about the application itself.
Thank you, Heather. And so here we are, you're looking at the required documents for your application. These are the Illinois Safe Routes to School funding application, the resolution of financial commitment and letter of support from a sponsoring roadway authority for any affected roadway. If your project intersects on a state road, get started on the letter of allowance with IDOT as soon as possible. You will need to contact your local road engineer, and we'll get into how you find your contact later on in this presentation. Resolution or letter of support from the school district, and also a detailed cost estimate that is prepared by an engineer. The Grant Accountability and Transparency Act, or GATA, became law in 2014 with the purpose of establishing a consistent, federally compliant requirement for all grants regardless of the source of funding. If your entity that you are a part of already received state funding, it is very likely that you have already met this criteria. So your first step will be to find the contact person that manages this information for your municipality or local government. But I will do a brief walkthrough to familiarize or refresh you with the GATA compliance. So GATA compliance requires that grantees are pre-qualified. That first step is to be registered in the Illinois Grantee Portal. But to do so, you will need a DUNS number and a SAM.gov account. A DUNS, or Data Universal Numbering System number, is used by the federal and state government to track how money is being allocated, and it's necessary to have before you apply for a SAM.gov account. The registration can take up to 15 minutes, and after you've completed that, it'll take approximately 2 business days to receive that number. SAM, or System for Award Management, is the official United States government system for grantees. The registration for a SAM account takes approximately 30 minutes to complete, but it can take up to 4 weeks to be registered. The status does need to be renewed every year. And if you already have a SAM account, please make sure that it is current. And that includes making sure that it does not expire anytime soon, especially not that it does not expire during the grant cycle that you're going to be doing for Safe Routes to School or any other grants that you're managing. And then, so to be GATA compliant, you must register in the State of Illinois Grantee Portal. This portal is used by all of the State of Illinois grant-making agencies. And once you have all the information that you need, which, as I mentioned before, would be the DUNS and the SAM.gov number, this process will take approximately 30 minutes. Once you're registered in the State of Illinois Grantee Portal, in the portal, you can actually see if your entity is, like, you would be able to make sure that you're not on the stop payment list, which would disqualify you from receiving state funding. If your entity were to be on there, that would be connected to a state agency, like you would know who that state agency would be, and then you would actually need to reach out to them to figure out what it is that you need to do to get off that list, what the process is that you need to follow. To qualify, you also need to make sure that you're not delinquent on reporting or any audit reviews. In addition, the state's Internal Controls Questionnaire, or ICQ, can also be found in the grant portal and must be completed every fiscal year, which begins July 1st, by all entities that are receiving state funding. And so due to the technical nature of the questions found in this assessment, it is recommended that it be completed by someone with financial or accounting experience at your organization. The questions are about various internal processes that will be involved in spending and accounting for any money provided by the state in a grant. And based on those responses that are provided, your organization will then receive a score that then denotes the risk associated with your existing processes. In addition, a programmatic risk assessment needs to be completed for each grant award. So if you've already completed a PRA for another grant that you're receiving from a different state agency, you would need to complete another one for Safe Routes to School. And IDOT, as the awarding agency, administers that and would determine the timing of the completion of that form. And that typically is done towards the end of the application cycle. Additional documents required as part of your application include the uniform grant application, the grant budget template, and disclosure of conflict of interest. The links to the required GATA forms are on IDOT's Safe Routes to School webpage. Next slide, please. And the numbers, the important GATA numbers that are listed on this slide, you will need to complete your uniform grant application. If you have any questions or need support with the GATA process, you can contact IDOT at dot.gata@illinois.gov. Next slide, please. The optional documents listed here can help you to show support from your community for your application. We're going to recommend that you document it as much as possible and be proactive in inviting the community to participate and provide input. It's a community-based program, and this is an important step of collecting letters of support from your MPO, PTAs and PTOs, local school councils, nonprofits, law enforcement, businesses, and public health agencies. The parent surveys and student tallies are highly recommended. IDOT is looking for the summary of your results of these surveys and these tallies. There are PDFs that you can download and print from IDOT's website. We've also created Google Forms of these surveys, which you can copy and have parents and teachers fill out online. These Google Forms are on our website, activetrans.org/ITEP. Other supporting documents that you can submit include photos, designs, school wellness policy, walk audit findings, event photographs, speech studies. Walk or bike the route with your local officials, school officials, law enforcement, parents, and especially students, and pay attention to what students think. They often see things differently than adults. You can also include a couple of maps, the project area with bubbles that call out the challenges and the proposed improvements to this route. And I believe passing it back to you, Maggie, for application walkthrough.
This is actually
Passing it to Mel. Yeah.
Oh, Melody, sorry,
Yeah.
Melody.
playing facilitator ping pong here. So in terms of the application itself, page 1 is your general contact information. If you have an MPO or an RPC, you don't necessarily have to have one, but if you are a member of one, please include the contact person for that entity. Obviously, you're going to state the overall project cost and the requested safe routes amount. So if the project itself costs $1 million, that's fine. And you're requesting $250,000 for the safe routes from the Safe Routes program. That's what we're looking for. The project relations is a question about contingency. So the question is, does the funding of this project depend on another project that's happening around that school? So do you need to get this money in order to leverage another project, or vice versa? Proximity, we need the location of the project and proof that it is within a 2-mile radius or the walk shed of a primary or middle school. And then please address the right of way, and does it need to be purchased, or do you already have it in hand? Next slide. The optional attachments, as Crispina just mentioned, are the student surveys and tallies. We had a question in the question box. I'm going to go ahead and address it now. Concerns over COVID-19 and the restrictions and inability to really get that kind of data in, with students being maybe hybrid or parents not being on site very much, that kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely, that's going to be a challenge. There are other ways that you can document the issues and concerns if you are unable to identify like the number of students who are walking or biking to school or what parents' concerns are. You can do individual stakeholder interviews, so talking to people like the crossing guards and the PTA and student council representatives to just do a very qualitative interview of issues. You could do that. You can also do a site observation yourselves, stand outside a school at any arrival and dismissal time period and document the issues that you're seeing. There are other ways to gather some of that qualitative information. Key stakeholder interviews we talked about, public meetings if there are any in the, not just the recent past, but in the far back past. You know, if you did one 5 years ago, that's still useful information. If you've done a walkability or a bikeability audit recently, and then school wellness policies are important. Every school, public school is required to have one, or school district is required to have one, and frequently they mention increasing physical activity as a goal of the school. So that is important evidence that the school district itself considers increasing physical activity through things like walking and biking to school a priority. Next slide.
One note about the school wellness policy: if your school doesn't have one, don't worry about it. There are again other things that you can provide to show what is going on around the school and the interest in walkability, bikeability.
Right. The next page is the checklist of the infrastructure options that Heather went through. And this is really kind of nice because it makes it very clear and concise exactly what you're applying for. It's clear cut. It's either a yes or a no. And so just go ahead and check off the different types of projects or the different types of treatments that you are hoping to construct. Next slide. Page 3 is your narrative. You're going to describe the location, attach your maps, indicating where specifically the project is proposed to go, which schools are impacted, describe the project. We all know what that means. A demonstration of need is really finding that those specific things to your community that explain why this project is needed. It's a little different than maybe other transportation projects you might be applying for. For example, check your public health department's data on the levels of childhood obesity. That would be a standard of need that could be used to validate your project. Something else, you know, speed studies, the number of speeding tickets that have been given outside the school, the line of cars, you know, take a photo of the egregious number of cars that are lined up and blocking traffic. If you've had any near misses, documentations of near misses of crashes or crashes, crash data itself, all that kind of stuff, just to demonstrate that you either have a problem with traffic safety around the school, or you have issues that need to be addressed in student health and wellness, or both. Safety hazards and barriers to bicycling, those are, again, the things that you can identify with, you know, the broken sidewalks or the lack of sidewalks or the lack of crossings or the crossings that are faded, the different elements that are not in place. The potential to improve walking and biking, this one is a little bit different. So you want to explain that if we did have an ideal condition, if we were to improve this, the environment for walking and biking for students, we could get this whole neighborhood. You know, there are 350 students that live in this particular subdivision. Or if we were able to get kids across this main arterial roadway, we could remove, you know, 100 cars from our student arrival and dismissal periods. Things like that. Like, how will this project really change the way life is for these students? Project readiness, that involves, you know, do you have physical engineering 1 and 2, 1 and/or 2 done? Do you have your right-of-way in place? Do you have other funds that are ready to go to fund PE 1 and 2? Other things like that. And then consultation and support, as many letters of support as you can get. I mean, include entities like your business community, local foundations or funders, local, organizations that work for health and wellness, anything you can think of. Next slide. Here's your detailed cost estimate. Most of you who have applied for IDOT funding for infrastructure in the past know well what this looks like. You'll want to have this done by, prepared by an engineer. You will be using IDOT's Form BDE, Bureau of Design and Environment 213, and it uses all the usual measurements, including quantity, unit price, total cost, those kind of things. Next. Page 5 is a summary. This is where you get to kind of go nuts and talk about why your project is so very well constructed and needed, and all the wonderful things it's going to do. And then if you have any other members of your Safe Routes to School team that you have consulted and contributed to developing the project, please add those people in. Applications are due Thursday, September 30th at 4:30 p.m. electronically. So that's going to be a timestamp on when your email is received. So as with all things tech, don't wait till the last minute in case you have a glitch or your internet goes down or whatever else might happen. You're going to email a PDF of the application packet itself. That should be a file size that's emailable. The attachments may be too large to send via email. So if that is the case, you can use IDOT's file transfer link that is, you will find it on the application itself and in a few other places on IDOT's website. And no hard copies required. Woohoo! Let's all celebrate. So that's a good thing. Next. And I'm turning it back over.
Great. So just some general tips for your application. First, we had mentioned a few times contacting the need to contact your local IDOT district office for various components of your application, including getting approvals to do a project on a state road, or making sure things like lighting or other infrastructure you're proposing is eligible and meets state and federal guidelines. So to do that, you can call your local IDOT district office and ask for your, you can call your local IDOT district office and ask for your local roads engineer. You can also find contact information at the link posted on this page that Christina will also drop in the chat. And then the next slide. So also some more tips on choosing a project that we have. The first is just thinking about identifying needs. So Christina and Melody both mentioned the parent surveys, travel tallies. There's many ways to figure out what your biggest needs are in your community. So we recommend just talking to as many people as you can, reviewing existing plans and work that have been developed that relate to the areas around your schools, looking at any data that's been collected in the past or in the present, having conversations, talking to the police department about crash data. There's many different ways that you might be able to kind of hone in on which projects will provide the most benefit and take it from there. Another tip we have is to do some observations. We know that school traffic might look a little different this year than it has in previous years, but depending on where you live in the state, it might look very much the same. So you might want to talk to the school principal or district office and see if you might be able to observe arrival and dismissal time and see where students are walking and biking and where they aren't, or where there might be issues. You could also just have a chat with the school principal, staff, or students and get a better understanding of what their challenges are. Staff and principals especially are, monitoring school arrival and dismissal time every day. And even if conditions aren't quite the same this year, they've seen a lot of things in the past and will have ideas about where their challenges are and thoughts about what might be able to help improve them. You also want to think about sort of further where to kind of focus your efforts and where you might want to start your network. So some ideas are looking at physical barriers like busy roads, railroad tracks, or busy intersections that are hazards and require students to be bused or more parents drive as a result. Thinking about what the main route kids are funneled into to get to school every day, and thinking about ways you might be able to improve it. So for example, are there sidewalks along the entire kind of main street? Are there crosswalk improvements to make it just safer for kids to cross the street? Are there opportunities to further separate students from car traffic, for example, putting in a buffer or something else? And as we mentioned, a key component of scoring is to think about underserved communities and accessibility. So are there places in your community that serve schools with higher needs than others? And if there are, can you prioritize improvements in those? Maybe again, there's students with disabilities living in a specific area, and maybe sidewalks could be added, or curb ramps, or signals could be modified to be accessible. So we also recommend getting started on the following bullets as soon as you can to create a really strong application. So some things you should be thinking about is looking for opportunities to identify matching funds. They might come from the school district might be able to provide a match for your project or help with that. You might look for other funders locally that could help. You also want to think about starting to collect your letters of support that Maggie and Melody both talked about, and Christina. So these could be from the MPO, your parents groups, law enforcement, local businesses, students, or others. You also, related, want to start thinking about how you're going to demonstrate community support. So this could be through the surveys and tallies that we mentioned earlier, public meetings if you've had them in the past, or can do a virtual one today. Again, those letters of support that we recommended, the checklists that IDOT makes available that you can use for an audit, and so on. It's also a good idea, once you have your project identified, to start thinking about the needs statement. So what unique problem will your project solve in the community, and how will it, as Melody said, change everything and make the trip to school just so desirable that everybody wants to do it on foot or by bike. You'll also want to start gathering your collateral data. So any traffic information you have, crashes, you might also be able to find different data from sources about health or air quality that can help really make the case for why this project is so important to your community. And if needed, you can also start reaching out to engineering firms to help see if they can provide a detailed cost estimate for your project. As Melody mentioned, these need to be done accurately. It's one of the key components of this funding source is to make sure you're getting it right, because if you don't get to have a change order and may have to return the funds. There's several engineering firms that we've been in contact with that offer application support to high need communities. So you can find them at this link listed on this slide that Christina will drop in the chat. And the next slide also just shows you what the list looks like. So we have a list of firms on the left side of the page, and then who they serve on the right side. So some are statewide and some are specific to different regional areas of Illinois. And I mentioned before to start thinking about your local match. Again, Safe Routes to School will require a 20% local matching funds for any grant received. So there's lots of different ways for getting that local match money if you're not able to budget it within your city budget. There's different federal funds that some federal funds cannot be used and some can. The ones that are eligible include IDNR grants, community block grants, local tax funds, and other donations. In some locations, motor vehicle fuel taxes are allowed, but in others they aren't. So we recommend checking with your IDOT district office to confirm that. And there's also lots of other non-traditional matching funds you might be able to identify, such as local foundations, fundraising by the PTAs or PTOs, or even local businesses may be able to help if the project is the one that they think meets the needs of the community.
All right, thank you, Heather. So we will look at our chat now and can go through any questions that came up, and we'll be perhaps calling on some of the IDOT staff that are here too. But before we get into that, so Mel is going to read the questions, but just a few more details for you. So our next webinar is September 8th on Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. again for just open general Q&A. So after you've really gotten started on your application, more questions might come up, and we can help address some of those. Reminder that the application is due September 30th. If you do have questions, you can get in touch with IDOT's Safe Routes team, dot.saferoutes@illinois.gov, and that activetrans.org/ITEP website is a good one for. We'll put resources there. We'll put the recording of this webinar, and you can also email me at maggie@activetrans.org if you have any other questions. And yeah, let's Mel, I'll turn it over to you to start going through the chat box.
Sounds good. I'm going to start with kind of the questions that have multiple people asking the same thing. So with IDOT, you want to unmute yourself because we're going to get ready to throw some at you. So first question involves preliminary engineering 1 and 2, a couple of questions. The first question is, when we say that, do we mean IDOT's full PE process has to be complete for PE1? And is PE2 also not fundable and considered needing to have been done in advance?
Yeah, this is John. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, when we say preliminary engineering, we mean PE1 and PE2. We should know that you've at least submitted the PDR to the local district local roads office.
Okay. Another question, a related question was, it's difficult for rural and small towns to they will not approve PE1 or 2 unless they know that construction has been approved. So do you have any suggestions for that dilemma?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? You cut out a couple times.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the question was, and this is from Terry, that sometimes small communities are not willing to authorize spending money on PE1 or 2 unless they know that construction funding is secured. So do you have any suggestions for that dilemma?
Well, I think the question is asking that the local governing agency wants to know that they've actually received funding or been awarded before
Yes.
they will commit to PE1 and 2. Okay. Yeah, that's why we have allowed 6 months after the award date for them to get PE.
Okay.
Yeah. So that
Great.
should give them time, because usually these are the PE portions of these projects can normally move pretty quickly.
Great.
And notice in the guidelines that it says PE should be completed within 6 months. So, you know, if we know that they're moving and they're not going to get it done for 8 months, that's fine.
Okay. So just a letter of commitment would be good to secure that, for IDOT
Yes.
to feel secured. Okay, great.
Yep.
All right. Let's see here. Okay, a question about District 1, and maybe this is more for District 1, but design approval often takes 6 months with District 1, which would prevent people from being able to apply. Do you have any suggestions for that, or should they talk to D1?
They should talk to District 1.
Hunt.
I,
Okay.
I'm not feel comfortable answering for them.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see. Can park districts apply if there is a Jason? Go ahead.
Absolutely. They are a governing taxing body.
Great. Questions about the 250,000 limit. Is that a 250,000 limit plus the 20% match, or is that inclusive of the 20% match?
They can receive up to $250,000 in federal funds.
Okay, so they could add the 20% onto that.
Yes.
Okay. And also, if there is a project that is $1 million, for example, I just want to make sure that my answer previously was correct. And they can prove that they have support for the rest of the project. The $250,000 is okay to apply for a portion of a larger project, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Question about BDE or BLR. Which set of standards should they be using?
Talk to your district.
Okay, sounds good.
It'll depend on the exact location of the project and the improvements. Yeah, they should talk to the local IDOT districts on that.
Okay, great. When we say that there is a per district limit of one proposal per school district, what does that mean for a parochial school? Does that mean per the diocese, or if it were a Catholic school, for example, or if it's an individual, it's like a private school that is not affiliated with a
yeah, in that case, we would go per school.
Per school.
We wouldn't include the entire diocese as a district.
Okay, terrific. So there is an instance where there's a county-wide project to install flashing beacons throughout a county. This person is asking how they might go about applying for safe routes in that instance. Would it be restricted to one application for the entire county, or should they maybe go locally and have each local apply? They would have
to go locally because each project has to be within 2 miles of the school.
Of a school, right?
Yep. So they would have to split those up.
And they would also have the opportunity to get more funding if they had the local apply, right?
They would have that opportunity, absolutely.
Yeah, great. There were a couple of questions about supporting documents, about reusing student tallies, COVID restrictions and things like that. Can they use older data that maybe they have gotten for previous applications?
I would tend to say we prefer not,
Mm-hmm.
but if they did student tallies and parent surveys for the last cycle, I wouldn't go back any further than that, but for the 2018-19 cycle, if we have some assurance that they haven't had any major changes in population or that type of thing, then just make it clear to us that those are from the last cycle so that we know. I wouldn't say that we would discount them.
Great. Another question about federal aid. Since it's a federal aid project, do the programs require a NEPA?
I believe they do, but again, check with the district offices.
Okay. Yeah, I remember there was a conversation, this is way back, but there was a conversation at the federal level trying to alleviate some of those federal aid requirements because they were onerous if you were just trying to put in, a crosswalk or something.
Right.
It seemed overly onerous. So I'm not sure where that landed, but
Yeah, I'm not either. So the districts would either know or be able to investigate that and give an answer.
Okay, great. Another question, is there a way to access past applications? If a municipality applied years ago and they don't, for some reason, don't have a saved copy of that, would there be a possibility of getting copies of previous applications?
I shoot us an email at dot.saferoutes@illinois.gov, and we can look at that on an individual basis because we need to make sure that we're following the FOIA rules and all that kind of stuff.
Great. Next question, if a community has an open Safe Routes to School grant that is constructed but not quite closed out by IDOT, may that community apply for a new grant?
Yes.
Yes. Great.
Simple answer. Yep.
Let's see here. There was one question about tree room, like a specific project idea. Someone had mentioned that there was a tree root problem that was causing sidewalk upheaval. Would a Safe Routes grant conceivably pay for tree removal if the tree was in a private property owner's lot yard?
As long as the private property owner gives you permission. yes, we would pay for the removal. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm going to do a quick scan of the rest of the questions, make sure I didn't miss anything. Somebody spend some time for a second?
I have a quick update about NEPA. In the guidelines, it says that most Safe Routes to School infrastructure projects will fall under categorical environmental exclusions that recognize construction of bicycle and pedestrian lanes, paths, and facilities are not involving significant environmental impacts. But as John says, checking with your IDOT district local roads office is always a good idea, just to be sure.
Great. I'm still scanning. If there are any other new questions, go ahead. If I did not hit something, take a minute to retype your question into the question box, please. I'll get back to you.
This is John. Could I just make a couple comments?
Yes.
As you were flipping through the slides and stuff, and you were talking about identifying projects and locations and stuff, what I would suggest is when you're looking at where your projects could or should be located, start at the school and work out. Don't start out and work towards the school, because we can provide lots of nice sidewalks and good routes on the way to the school, but if you get to the school and you don't have a good crosswalk, then we've not accomplished what we're doing. So I would suggest start at the school and work your way out. Also, ADA compliance, please keep in mind when you're identifying your project and working on your cost estimates and stuff, that every part of that project has to be ADA compliant. If you're building a sidewalk up to an intersection, you have got to do your curb ramps. And so please keep that in mind when you're identifying the scope of the project.
Awesome. And there were several questions about presentation. We are going to send an email to everyone who registered for the webinar today with both a link to where we'll post the recording as well as a PDF of this, and the link will obviously have the links that have been mentioned throughout the webinar will obviously be included in that PDF, but we'll also put them in the body of the email as well, so you can click for easier clicking ability. Another question, does the entire intersection need to be made ADA compliant or just the approach or side of the new sidewalk?
I believe you have to do the entire intersection. Again, check with your district office to make sure, but I know that question has come up in the past.
Great. A question about Kansas City that is taking the lead in developing the overall application, administer the electronic student Google surveys. Yes, you absolutely can. School district doesn't have to, but you know, if you're offering to do that on behalf of the school district, I'm sure they would be very grateful. But certainly be in touch with them and connect with them about that. Is that okay, John?
Absolutely, yes, that is okay.
Okay, great.
And if you end up using the Google form for the surveys, you might want to contact me because we'll have to copy it and put it in your own personal Google Drive. So if you have any issues, email me, maggie@activetrans.org.
Great. I think we got everything. If there's anything outstanding, please go ahead and you can email the Safe Routes email address there. That would be my first suggestion. You could also email Maggie@activetrans.org, but we will ultimately just be mostly just forwarding it back to John. So your best bet is to email the dot.saferoutes@illinois.gov email address. And the second, as we mentioned, our second webinar in September is going to be 100% dedicated to more Q&A. So it's September 8th. We hope that that's early enough in the process for you to get the answers you need to complete your application on time. We booked 90 minutes for it. We will both address any questions that have come in since, we'll cover the questions that were asked today, as well as re-answer those, answer anything that has come in the interim, and then you will have an opportunity to ask more live questions. So, hoping
there's a question in the chat.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
A city taking the lead on developing an application. Can they administer electronic student Google surveys through their own means, like the Facebook page, their own Facebook page, website? Yep. Or is it better to have it administered by a school or a school district?
Yeah, that's
the question about who takes the lead.
That was similar to the question that was in the Q&A, and the answer is yes. The city can take the lead as long as the school district, has given its blessing. It doesn't really matter, I don't think. I think the answer is whoever has the best access to parents and who is likely to get the best response. But it can be either.
A couple, just to close out, just some things to be thinking about as soon as you can if you're planning on applying for Safe Routes to School funding. So if you're not the school or school district, get in touch with your school or school district, or vice versa, the affected roadway agencies. Get in touch with your MPO, your RPC, Regional Planning Commission. As we've been mentioning, contact your IDOT District Local Roads Office for specific project questions, and start reaching out to your partners, stakeholders for collecting all of those letters of support. The sooner you can do that, the better. And find an engineer for your cost estimates. And as Crispina was saying, get started on your GATA forms as soon as you can, because that can take some time. And then create a plan for distributing those parent surveys, student tallies, or just really collecting the observations, such as completing the walking and biking checklists for the audit. So you're observing what's happening. So just some tips on what can take some time and what to get started on now. And
this is John again. Can I elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah.
This program is a little different than other IDOT programs, and in that it's very community based. this is all about your kids, my kids, everybody's kids getting to school safely. And so when it comes to distributing the parent surveys, doing the student tallies, doing the walking, biking checklist, this, it should be a collaboration with the local agency, the municipality, the school district, the local schools, the law enforcement agencies, the parents, the students, and that's why we say it doesn't matter who does the parent surveys or who sends them out. They should all be involved in doing it together. So that is extremely important with this program, and we consider that very highly, the amount of support and cooperation within the community. So just want to throw that out there.
Great, thanks, Jen. Well, with that, I think we can close out. So we'll be emailing you all with the recording and links. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you, John and the IDOT team, for being available for questions.
Hey, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. If you have questions, dot.saferoutes@illinois.gov.